Hi friends! Something unusual just popped up on the geopolitical radar, and it's not a drill. A US Army officer has proposed that America acquire the Commander Islands from Russia for $15 billion. The idea, to boost security and outmaneuver China in the Arctic. Sounds bold. It is. But could this be just the beginning of something much bigger? But before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We bring you the most urgent global updates, exclusive conflict insights, and accurate forecasts you won't find elsewhere. Earlier this week, U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Fritz proposed that the United States acquire the Commander Islands from Russia for $15 billion. On paper, it's framed as a deal. But let's not fool ourselves. This is not a shopping trip. This is strategy. This is pressure. This is power politics in action. According to Fritz, such a move would not only enhance U.S. security, but also reinforce American leadership in the Arctic. Sounds noble. That's just the surface. Because, and here comes the first twist, this idea comes not during peacetime, but against the backdrop of rising tensions with China. Yes, China again. And that's no coincidence. Let's zoom out. The Commander Islands may look like forgotten dots on the map, but their location is everything. They sit just west of Alaska, not far from key maritime routes in the Arctic and North Pacific. Their strategic value? Massive. They would place the US even closer to Russia's Far East, China's northern flank, and potentially open doors to control over Arctic navigation, surveillance zones, and forward military positioning. Still thinking it's just a property deal? Think again. This is where the real story begins, because if the United States were to take over the Commander Islands, even under the label of a purchase, it wouldn't just be an economic transaction, it would be a symbolic shift, a line in the ice, drawn right in Russia's backyard, and it would send a very loud message. The US is back, and it's not asking politely. But wait, that's not all. You may have missed a crucial detail. This idea is being floated while China continues its rapid military buildup in the Pacific, and while Japan, another regional power, has already announced plans to deploy 1,000-kilometer range missiles by 2026, aimed not at the moon, but very much in China's direction. So, what do we see here? A tightening triangle. Japan arms up. The US creeps forward in the Arctic, and China, watching it all, doesn't blink yet. Could the Commander Islands really be on the table? Probably not tomorrow. Russia is unlikely to hand over territory, especially now. But the fact that such an idea is even being discussed publicly by a US military officer is a signal in itself. It's a move in a long game, a test balloon, a quiet probe of how far Washington can reach and how much pushback it would face. So the question is not, will Russia sell? The question is, what happens when they refuse? And perhaps even more urgently, is this about deterring China or surrounding it? What looked like a single statement in the media has turned into a geopolitical firecracker. The Arctic, once a frozen quiet zone, is rapidly becoming the next arena of silent conflict. Not with bombs, not yet, but with maps, money, military whispers, and forward-thinking maneuvering. So don't scroll past this headline. This is one of those stories that seems distant, until one day it isn't. Because when superpowers start pointing at islands on maps and putting prices on them, they're not just planning purchases, they're planning positions. But here's the part you weren't supposed to overlook. This isn't the first time the US has tried to shift borders with a checkbook. Think back to Alaska in 1867, a purchase from the Russian Empire for $7.2 million. Back then, it was mocked as Seward's folly. Today, Alaska is one of the most strategically valuable regions the US controls, especially with the Arctic emerging as a new frontier of military and economic competition. So, when Lieutenant Colonel Fritz floated the idea of acquiring the Commander Islands, he wasn't just being creative. He was tapping into a long-standing US tradition of territorial maneuvering under the guise of diplomacy. But things are different now. The geopolitical climate is sharper, more brittle. The Commander Islands aren't just lonely rocks in the sea. They belong to Russia, a nuclear power currently under unprecedented international pressure. Suggesting any territorial deal, even hypothetical, touches a nerve. It's not simply about logistics, it's about sovereignty, pride, and balance. And what about the legal implications? Under international law, territory transfers must be voluntary and approved by both states. There's no mechanism for one country to simply take over land, no matter how strategic, no matter the price tag. That's where the conversation walks a thin line. Is this diplomacy? Is it pressure? Or is it a subtle testing of global reaction? Let's also consider the local angle. The Commander Islands are home to a small population, mostly Aleut people and Russian citizens. No matter how remote the land, these are inhabited spaces with cultural identity and historical roots. Would the local population agree to change national flags? Would Russia even allow such a discussion? At this stage, there are no signs of either, but it's the timing that speaks volumes. The world is already watching Taiwan, the South China Sea, and the East China Sea with unease. Japan is preparing for long-range missile deployment. China is reinforcing its coastal defenses. And now, the US is being linked to discussions, are however unofficial, of territorial expansion near Russian and Chinese spheres of influence. This may not be the beginning of a crisis, but it could very well be the beginning of a shift. Geopolitical strategy in the 21st century doesn't always unfold with loud declarations. Sometimes it starts with a single suggestion, a quiet proposal, a number in a military journal. But behind that number, $15 billion, is an entire framework of assumptions. Who owns what, who gets to decide, and how far nations will go to shape the map in their favor. So will the US pursue this idea seriously? Unclear. Will Russia entertain it? Highly unlikely. Will China watch every development with interest? Absolutely. Which brings us to the real point. This isn't about the islands. It's about influence. And as always in geopolitics, the map is never just a map. It's a mirror of ambition, risk, and the quiet tension between cooperation and control. And here's another layer that deserves more attention. Why now? Why would such a proposal surface at this exact moment? When tensions between the West and Russia are already strained, and when the US is simultaneously shifting more strategic attention to counterbalance China? The answer might lie not in the islands themselves, but in what they represent symbolically and logistically. In an age where Arctic routes are opening due to climate change and access to northern sea lanes is becoming a contested advantage, control over key points like the Commander Islands becomes more than territorial. It becomes tactical. From a military perspective, establishing a presence there, even theoretically, would extend early warning capabilities and enhance naval surveillance near critical choke points. It would also serve as a message to Beijing. American presence is expanding, quietly but deliberately. And while no official diplomatic initiative has followed Fritz's statement, it's not unusual in military political strategy for trial balloons to be floated by mid-level officers. These ideas, though unofficial, can serve as a barometer to test international reaction, to provoke discussion, to signal intentions without committing. So let's ask the question no one wants to put on record. What if this is less about buying and more about building a narrative? A narrative in which the US reclaims the initiative in remote theaters where Russia and China once moved unchecked. A narrative where even the remotest islands become part of a broader strategic story. And yes, Russia has yet to respond directly, but silence is not the same as indifference. If history tells us anything, it's that Moscow takes such suggestions seriously, no matter how unofficial they seem. The memory of lost territory, from Alaska to Eastern Europe, runs deep. And the idea of America, once again, gaining ground in the North Pacific, that's not likely to sit quietly in the Kremlin. As for China, even if the Commander Islands are not directly tied to its territory, the strategic implications are impossible to ignore. Every step the US takes in the Pacific or the Arctic tightens the strategic noose. Or at least, that's how it might look from Beijing. Add Japan's missile plans into the equation, and the chessboard feels increasingly crowded. But perhaps the most important point isn't military at all. It's psychological. Because when a global power like the US starts pointing to maps and speaking of acquiring territory, it doesn't need to fire a missile or raise a flag to make an impact. The idea alone shifts conversations. The tone changes. The the temperature rises. If you want to stay ahead of the curve with real-time updates, in-depth analysis, and expert insights on global flashpoints like this one, make sure to subscribe. This is just the beginning.